Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Misty Wild, COO of Culturati. For those who are new, Culturati is a community of C-suite leaders, scholars, and operators focused on one thing, really, which is building cultures that can perform under real pressure. We host candid conversations, commission research, and create spaces where leaders can think clearly about what's actually happening inside their organizations. Today's conversation gets at a hard truth. Transformation rarely fails because of strategy. It fails because under pressure, organizations behave like nervous systems, snapping back to what feels familiar. And let's be honest, our default behaviors aren't always the best ones. As AI accelerates work and disrupts identity, capability, and certainty, leaders are seeing patterns show up: control, urgency addiction, perfectionism, burnout disguised as performance. But these aren't character flaws, they're not even organizational flaws, they're threat responses. So I am especially glad to have Dr. Katie Pritchett with us today. Katie is a leadership professor, researcher, and founder of KPI Coaching. She brings nearly 20 years of experience across academia, corporate consulting, and government, including serving at UT Macomb School of Business, leading organizational effectiveness work at and advising Fortune 100 companies and the U.S. Department of Defense. What makes Katie's work powerful is that she doesn't just talk about change. She helps leaders build the regulation and capacity required to sustain it. Her organizational nervous system lens gives us practical language and tools to understand culture as stress behavior and to shift it deliberately. Today, you'll walk away with clarity on your organization's default stress reflex and what it actually takes to build a culture that stays steady while stretched. Katie, we're grateful you're here. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Misty. I really appreciate that introduction and reading off some of my bio. I am so happy to be joined with everyone today and those who will watch beyond, because this is something I am so passionate about. And I know I share that same passion with Culturati about letting work be a place of fulfillment. So I am really happy to go ahead and just jump right into this topic. I want to tell a little bit of a story though, because now that you've heard a little bit about my bio and a little bit of about my background, you could surmise that I have been in the room with some of the smartest people in the world, like I am today, obviously. And so I've been with visionaries who can, scale companies at warp speed, who can make decisions that affect thousands of people in a positive way before lunch. I've worked at federal, state, local government levels. I've been in Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies, nonprofits, and growth stage startups. And what I've watched time and time again, unfortunately, is that those same leaders that are brilliant can also come to a grinding halt or even have the organization come to that type of halt. And it's not because they lack strategy or they didn't care, but it's because their nervous system didn't feel safe. And so I want to tell a little bit of a story of a leader where that was the exact case. This is a leader at a Fortune 5 company, a company you know well, major tech company. And I was in a room with a senior leader, and we were working on a major change initiative, a big technological change. But unfortunately, despite the solid strategy on paper and how it all should have worked beautifully, it didn't. And the teams are dragging their feet. There were lots of side conversations that were happening everywhere except the actual meetings where we needed to hear the dissonance. And so there was friction that you could feel, but people couldn't quite name. And so I named it. And I brought it up to the senior leader who was sponsoring the transformation. And I told him, this is not a strategy problem. This is a nervous system problem. Change, even good change for the benefit of individuals or the company, it activates a threat response. And as I was speaking about this, he cut me off mid-sentence. And he said, and I quote, "With all due respect, young lady," I'll leave you with that. If it were a live audience, I would hear your audible gasp. So I'll just imagine you just did. He said, "With all due respect, young lady, leadership is not rocket science. They need to get on board or get out of the way." My body reacted before my brain did. My chest tightened, my jaw clenched, And in that split second, with my reaction to what he said, my fight, flight, or freeze reaction to what he said, I remembered that is what his employees were going through. And so it hit me viscerally. And so I locked eyes with him and I paused and I said, actually, I agree with you. Leadership is not rocket science, but it is neuroscience. And he was quiet and he leaned forward and he said, what do you mean? And that is the moment that changed everything. And since that moment, I cannot unsee the patterns in organizations. We design for strategies, we design for incentives, we design for operating models, but we do not and have not designed our organizations for how the human nervous system actually responds under pressure. And when you don't design that way, even the best strategy will collapse under stress. So I want to acknowledge, I know that several different people signed up for this, and there are some senior and middle managers who have joined today. And I know the load you are carrying, it is heavier than ever. And I know that you also feel like you might not even have the authority you need to do that. And so I want to be clear that the framework I'm about to share is not about fixing you. It is about giving you language and leverage and design principles. And the reason why I say it's design principles is because the design matters. Survival wiring optimizes for short-term control and certainty. If we want to wire for thriving, it optimizes for learning, judgment, and capacity. And that's why I'm seeing AI pilots and large matrix organizations are stalling out right now. The decision cycles are stretched. Innovation is starting to flatline. And that's because not that they need less pressure, but it's because their systems can't hold the pressure without breaking. And so I'll have Annie go ahead and just launch a poll really quick. And if you don't mind, on a scale of 1 to 5, I would just be curious to check in with you, for those of you who are here. On a scale of 1 to 5, how often does your organization feel like it's operating in survival mode right now? I would love to hear from you. And while you're doing that, I'll just do a quick voiceover that survival mode in organizations has a real bottom line implication. Gallup released a report late last year that estimates 322 to 438 billion with a B dollars are lost globally in lost productivity from burnout, disengagement. I had mentioned already AI initiatives are not providing the ROI expected. And for all my HR people on the who are on the webinar, you know that turnover of high performers is also very costly, anywhere between 50 to 200% of that person's salary. So the ultimate bill is in the trillions. All right, let's go. Let's see. I see some people are answering in chat as well. Okay, we're getting lots of 5s and lots of 4s if you're looking at the poll results. So yes, thank you so much. Here's the thing about that though. When we realize that we're at that high level, we have to understand that the design matters. And so if you're experiencing most of you at those 5s and 4 levels, the design is going to make the difference because the traditional change models that are out there, they have made some very deep assumptions. For example, that we as employees, people are rational actors with stable cognition and linear adoption. And I laugh because I know you are too. Neuroscience shows us something very different. Threat-driven cognition, like we are protective actors under pressure. Even the best of us who have done all of our beautiful inner work, we still are neurologically wired to be scanning our environment for threat. And when the nervous system is in threat, is in survival mode, our sympathetic fight, flight, or freeze, our dorsal shutdown, the brain prioritizes fast, automatic protective reactions over slower, deliberate, strategic thinking. And in biological terms, the prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that is handles the planning, the perspective taking, creative problem solving, long-term judgment, that prefrontal cortex is not running the show as powerfully because literally it's getting less blood flow, less oxygen, and less neural activation. So, what this means is we will have organizations with beautiful cultural models and values and posters on the wall, what they would like to see. But biology is going to win every time. When the human brain detects a threat, and I mean it could be as simple as like maybe a change in the org structure. The blood is diverted away from the non-essential functions, from your digestive system, from your heart, from your lungs, and it's sent to the muscles in the brain to literally fight. And so, under chronic stress, the prefrontal function can be impaired up to 40%. And that's why viewing our organizations as having its own nervous system helps us better explain stress, helps us better understand behavior under pressure. Because the brain and the central nervous system have one job and one job only. It is to keep us alive. And so surviving is not the same as thriving. And most organizations, most humans don't just want to survive. We want to thrive. And right now, like I said, in 2026, that survival wiring is very, very costly to our organizations, and not just bottom line, but in what we see in health and wellness as well. And so by the end of today, you are going to see that thriving under pressure isn't just about better people. I'm going to give you three design choices that leaders can make starting today. And so let me go ahead and just pause right here and tell you where we're headed for the rest of the webinar. What we're going to be doing is talking about why pressure decision is a big deal related to our biology. We are going to look at the organization from the org, team, and leader level. We are going to participate in three micro resets. So I know I can't see your faces, but I want this to be interactive. So you can expect a few more polls to come up and a few more chat prompts. So thank you all for being so active in the chat already. So I'll go ahead and do that. And what I want to share is that this organizational nervous system, it isn't a fad. It's not a framework to adopt. It is a design principle. Because if you can understand it, you can redesign how decisions get made, how pressure gets absorbed, and how change actually holds. And I am purposefully using organization over company because I want you to know that you could use this at your nonprofit. You could use it if you're a board member of an organization. You could use it in your schools or with your family. Truly, truly with your organization. And so we'll do a few micro moments as well after I share some neurological studies. And I want to be clear for those senior leaders here. These micro moments are little practices. They are not the solution. They're a demonstration of a simple design aspect that you could start doing today. So that's what I want to go ahead and just and set that up of where we're headed today. And I'll be sharing three groundbreaking neurological studies that came out in 2025 and how they impact our organizations. But before I just do that really quick, if you don't mind, you heard Misty share my bio, but I want to just share a little bit more about me that's not in my bio. It is my passion, my absolute vision for the world. And I believe that organizations can be places that can be fulfillment, that people should work should be fulfilling and joyful. And so I think that now, based on where we are, we're at a critical inflection moment in how organizations operate. Because as humans, we have this very important choice to make. We can continue maximizing output by stretching human beings far past their biological limits, or we can design systems and organizations that generate performance because they work with human biology, not against it. And like I said, I've worked inside organizations. I've also been a consultant and worked with senior leaders in hundreds of organizations. And I've seen profound breakthroughs and workshops and speeches that I've done and coaching moments. But then months later, I'll see those organizations or people snap back to old patterns. And that's what got me curious. Because what I discovered is mindset tools and empathy and psychological safety. Those are great, but they are not enough if the system does not feel safe. Biology is going to win out every single time over intention or strategy. And so, again, this work is about building systems that honor human biology because performance that violates physiology is never going to be sustainable. And when I mention this moment in time, I really mean it. If you are, up to date, I'm a big nerd. I read all the things around organizations. And so last week, just last week, Gallup released its first ever global most important problem report. It came out, it surveyed 107 countries, so not just the United States. And one of the findings is that the economy is the number one concern at 23% across the countries. But that is not the most important statistic. The most important statistic is that this is the highest the concern has ever been in 20 years. None of these threats are new. Work and politics and safety. I remember when I was working in organizations and cloud computing in 2007 was supposed to break every company. And so, what I want to share is it's not that the threats are new. What is new, what is different about this time is the pace and the volume of change is no longer allowing the nervous system to stand down. And this is not theoretical. You can feel it. In fact, share with me, please, in chat. Type one word about how this pace of change feels in your body right now. If you're thinking about AI and all the geopolitical things happening, you know, go ahead and just share with me because I know this isn't abstract. I know it's why employee pulse surveys are showing rising anxiety and those things. Let's see. Oh, I said anxiety. Hi, Cheryl. Anxiety. Kate, heavy. Yeah. Hi, Christy. It is too rapid. Oh, tight. Yes, Katie, tight chest. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it is happening. Too many things are colliding at the same time. And so here's some more from the report just to share a little bit more as you're sharing. Exhausting. Yes. Hi, Mark. It is exhausting. Joy. Joy is feeling burnout. Do you see that in the chat? Joy has experienced that. That's just incongruent. We need to get you back in alignment, Joy. We will get you back. It is scary, Jason. It can be. And when we're in fear, when we're in frustration, that we know exactly what's happening in our nervous system. Yeah. And so these were my top takeaways. The report is free to download with your email address, so feel free to go ahead and do that on Gallup's website. What I want to point out are two things on the slide. The first is this conclusion. This is literally the last phrase in the entire, this is like their punchline in the executive summary. People are wondering, can we live well, work well, trust their leaders? Does this sound familiar and feel safe, right? Yeah, of course. And then my top five takeaways are on the right. But the thing I'll point out is like really just bookended by humans are in survival mode, so organizations are too, and organizations can't outperform biology. And so the more demands, the more things that we're seeing, this is why the organizational nervous system matters, because your work has to ensure that the system has enough ability to regulate and recover, the capacity to recover, so that it can absorb change, not just survive it. And I know I'm not alone. I'm sure many of you, and I see some familiar names in the chat. I know that many people are parents or are fortunate enough to be around children, and I just want to share. It's one of my favorite stories about my son when he was in kindergarten. He's in second grade now, but when he was in kindergarten, he came home with this cute little lima bead seedling. They grow really fast. And his teacher sent home some questions that we could ask them about their biology lesson. And one of the questions, because when you ask your kid, how was school? How did it go? They're like, fine, nothing, I don't know. So she sent home some meaningful questions that we could ask. And one of them was, how do you know something is alive? How do you know something's alive? And my son said, as deadpan and simple as possible, he looks at me and goes, it changes. How do you know something's alive? It changes. If your organization is not changing because of all this economic pressure, it is not truly alive. It is just thriving. And yes, That is a hill I am willing to die on because high performance cultures under sustained pressure are actually the ones that are the closest to collapse. The data show that leaders are now reporting more stress than their direct reports. But y'all, you know this. You know that an organization under constant pressure without recovery, it's not going to, it doesn't stop working. It stops adapting. It can execute, it can comply in survival mode, but it cannot evolve. We can't do both at the same time. And so, a thing that I often tell leaders that I work with is please do not mistake busyness for progress. And so, those high performing cultures that will only experience a sustained stress that don't redesign are going to be the ones closest to collapse. And Gallup's data shows that is the same as well. And so it's why I've helped leaders to understand that resiliency is a good thing, but every good thing, when taken to an extreme, has a downside. And that's why I've started to introduce the concept of toxic resilience. Toxic resilience is keep doing the same thing and expecting different results. You've heard that before, right? It's the ability to keep pushing without recovering, without learning, without changing. And regeneration is the opposite of that. It's like, let's learn from this. Let's change the system because of this. Why is that the policy? So, what's interesting is toxic resilience will mask, it will look like strength right up until the system stops changing. And so I just tend to get people real curious about this slide when I talk about toxic resilience versus regeneration. And so I just right before the webinar, I thought, oh yeah, and I popped that QR code up there in the upper corner because if you are curious, I do have a free, people are like, well, what does this look like for me? Am I in toxic resilience? So I have a free survival pattern quiz on my website. You'll get one of four archetypes. It gives you a neuroscience-backed way for rewiring if you are in toxic resilience. So I just built this for the everyday person after interviewing 100 leaders and seeing the four archetype themes. So that's just a side note. But I want to get back to the company level because I believe that's why you're here. At the company level, toxic resilience sounds like, let's just push through this next quarter and then things will calm down. And then they don't. Right? Does that sound familiar? That's not a leadership flaw. That is a system stuck in toxic resilience. So if you remember my son's kindergarten answer, how do you know something is alive? It changes. That's what I want to invite organizations to do. How do we redesign? How do we change and design for regeneration? We're not going to remove the pressures. But how do we restore the system's ability to adapt under load in a very human way? So, we've been talking about the organizational nervous system. What is it? Well, you know a lot about your own nervous system. I didn't want to give you the nervous system one-on-one. I assume you know that. But the organizational nervous system exists at three levels. It is the composite of the macro, meso, and micro levels. The macro is the whole org, the culture, the strategy, the rewards. The meso is the teams and departments. The micro is the individual leaders and employees. And so that's where I want to be talking about, and I will be continuing to talk about it. So, but I am curious. We'll have Annie go ahead and just put another poll up. I would love to know from you when you think about your organization, which level feels more in survival mode? I'm just curious if you think about it from the meso, the macro, or the micro. Oh, and while you're doing the poll, I'm reading the chat. Joy, a real problem with the word resilience. I hear you. I hear you because we can't just keep expecting people, wow, I'm sorry the system is stacked against you. Keep going. I'm with you, Joy. That's why I started to introduce it as toxic resilience. I really appreciate that. Thank you. All right, everybody. How's it looking, Annie? What are our results? Oh, we do not have consensus here. The macro at 40%, the meso at 25%, and the micro at 35%. It is so fascinating. Thank you for sharing. In my experience, when I've been going into organizations, I've been noticing it more at the meso level, but you're telling me about 25% versus the macro at 40. But what's so important to know is that they all are feedback sharing with each other. So obviously one is affecting the other. So you might just then be seeing it more at the macro level. But fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing. Okay. Well, so I just have this statistic up here as if you need more data to tell me what you're already experiencing. The one on the far left is about showing how middle management is burnout is much higher than the front line. That is for the first time ever that switch flipped in 2025. We are starting to see change fatigue at 3 times the volume we used to see in pre-2020 levels with zero built-in recovery time. Obviously, that's why that's there. And in that Gallup report, I'm sorry, not in Gallup, in the Harvard Business Review report that came out last month in January 2026, it says that organizations, when the three most common ways that people are describing change in the organizations is chaotic, uncontrollable, and defeating. And that mirrors the things that you shared with me in chat earlier today. So, just a real quick map over of the macro, meso, and micro. It's mapped against toxic resilience and regenerative. I don't have a lot of time to spend on just this slide alone, but what I want to, if it's interesting to you, go ahead and screenshot it. Share it with everyone. Let's go ahead and make a movement. Regeneration is not soft. This isn't the cute stuff. This is the system's ability to sustain performance under load. This is about maintaining innovation, throughput, retaining our top talent, and then recovering after strain. And so the question isn't whether your organization is resilient. It's what Joy was talking about in the chat, what I was talking about with toxic resilience. The question is resilient toward what? Resilient toward survival cycling or resilient toward regenerative performance? And so this organizational nervous system gives leaders a way to redesign for regeneration. And so the rest of the session is going to be about how do we redesign. And this is, something I'll say often, but culture is not what you say. It's about how the system responds under pressure, and we can redesign that. So, ladies and gentlemen, I am so excited to share this with you. I am about to share three neuroscience breaking news neuroscience reports that came out just in 2025. So just last year, brand new. This is not this is not old school stuff. This is hot off the press of things that we have learned in neurobiology for our own individual brains and nervous systems and why it matters for organizational design. Why organizational psychologists should be screaming this from the rooftop. You tell Brene Brown and you and you tell them to call me. You tell Adam Grant to call me. We are going to make this a movement. Okay, the first one, you are so excited. The first one is about neuroception. This one is an update from the polyvagal theory that Porges gave us. He's been studying this forever. And this is one of the most important findings for leaders right now. Neuroception is the nervous system's unconscious safety scanner. And what we found in this study is that how it operates below conscious awareness and it decides in milliseconds whether the world or your meeting feels safe or dangerous. And here's what's so exciting is I remember teaching, I used to be a full-time professor at the University of Texas, and I would teach students about communication, and I would tell them that someone in the audience you only have 7 seconds to form a first impression. And what's so cool is that it's far outdated. What we are seeing in neuroception is in milliseconds. It's not even what the person says. The unconscious mind doesn't wait for the conscious mind to catch up. It's scanning tone of voice, micro facial expressions, pace of speech, even the energy in the room. Energy is real. We are feeling it from people. It's why the kids these days are saying, "Who's got the vibes," right? It's why we know those things. We feel the energy before we even believe or trust what they say. And so it instantly recruits one of three autonomic states. Ventral vagal will make you feel safe and social. A sympathetic response will be what we are traditionally talking about, fight, flight, and freeze, or a dorsal vagal, one is not as often talked about, is shut down. That's avoidance, that's numbness, that's feeling checked out. And we're starting to see a lot more of that in the organizations. That all became on, with quiet quitting and things. But here's the thing you need to know is that the neuroception is contagious. The scientist explains that humans are biologically wired for co-regulation. So one person's autonomic state directly and automatically influences another person's state through neuroception. It's the human domino effect. And so a person in ventral vagal sends safety cues that downregulates other people. A person in sympathetic, urgency, tension, sharp voice, will send a cue that upregulates or dysregulates another person. This is emotional contagion. And the business translation for this is that in most executive meetings, neuroception is detecting subtle threat. So it is quietly flipping the room into sympathetic or dorsal mode before anyone even realizes it. And that's why creativity drops or reactivity spikes when everyone will agree in the meeting on the goal, but things stall after. And so I just want to do a quick micro reset with you. And Misty, you obviously are already familiar with it. When we co-regulate together, we are sending safe signals. And so the group's neuroception is one way that we can do this. And we're not in the same room, but I just want to just introduce you to something called the physiological sigh. And here's why it works so well. It's a multi-inhale, a double, triple inhale through the nose rapidly, which expands the lungs and triggers the vagus nerve. And then we're going to do a long, audible exhale that offloads carbon dioxide, which is going to drop our heart rate and activate the ventral vagal, which is our social engagement circuit. And so when the leader does it first, this is important if you are a leader of an organization. When the leader does it first, the whole group then can do it together and you can co-regulate at scale. So the mirror neurons in our brain create breathing synchronicity and prosody, which is the sound of calmness, the exhale. It signals we are safe here. And I don't want to go too deep into neuroscience. I don't want to nerd out too much, but just wanted to share a little bit. So in 30 seconds, you can measurably shift an entire room from sympathetic dorsal into ventral vagal dominance. So I just want to do two quick physiological resets with you so that you know what this feels like. So what's going to happen is you're going to inhale through your nose quickly, as high as you can go, and then you're going to hold it, and I want you to take, at least if you can, two more sips in. Hold it for a second, and then sigh as if you're fogging a window, fogging a mirror. So I can't see you, so I'm hoping you are trying it. Inhale, expand the lungs, and then as if you're fogging the window. And so if you did do that, I would love for you to share in chat. Does your body feel different? Normally, when we are together in a room, I would ask, how does the energy in the room feel? And it's usually quite different. We can feel the shift in our ventral vagal coming online. And so that's just a really interesting thing. So also notice if little things, if your shoulders have dropped or your jaw is a little less tight. We're seeing relaxed and instant calm. A little bit sort of, Eugene, we'll have to work on that. We'll do a little more. Yeah, slowing down and a reset. Oh, and Lisa, a little more alert. Yeah, because you have literally shifted where the blood and energy is in your brain back up to your prefrontal cortex, which is where you're able to do that higher order thinking. So very cool. All right. So I promised you three groundbreaking neuroscience studies. You keep coming that Susanna, yes, definitely calmer. I think, thank you. Um, I want to go ahead and move into our second study. The second study comes out of Kumagai and several other authors, some scientists, and it again came out last year. And what's so fascinating is it talks about predictive coding. So AI is like the big thing we're all talking about, but it's not just AI. There's tons of technology but it's all creating massive prediction errors around identity and capability. So what happens with prediction errors is the brain is doubling down on old assumptions or it'll shut down. And so if the brain is running on predictive coding, it's going to constantly predict what will happen and it will only pay attention to surprises. AI is creating massive prediction errors. And the ones that matter most to leaders are when they hear their team members say, "Who am I now? If a machine can do what I'm known for." That's their identity. They also are having predicting errors around capability. Am I still the expert or the decision maker or the strategist? And then tons of uncertainty. What happens next? Change and uncertainty are the greatest threat of all to the human brain. In fact, there was a study that just came out that said humans show more stress and duress if they're told that they have a 50% chance of receiving an electrical shock versus if they're told they have 100% chance of receiving an electrical shock. It's the uncertainty that is so, so tough. And so I would love for Annie to go ahead and do another poll really quick on a scale of 1 to 10. How much do you believe? How much do you believe AI will fundamentally change what strategic leadership looks like in the next 3 to 5 years? I would love for you to share that. And while you are making your predictions, I'll share the business translation is that your organization has a shared model of how things work. This is how our customers behave. This is what good performance looks like. This is my role. This is my value. This is what my team does. This is how we respond to market shifts. This is how we respond to competitors. These can all create big prediction errors because if the system defaults to protecting the old model, then you get resistance and slow adoption, though we've always done it this way. The side conversations, the stalled pilot programs. But if it defaults to updating the model, you get faster learning, innovation, and competitive edge. But the default response with predictive coding is protection to double down on the old assumptions. So let's go ahead and see the results. Okay, we are all over the place. Let's see, but no one was a one. So we're all agreeing that it's going to change. But it looks like 25, 35, 45, 55, 55% of you are a seven and above, that it'll fundamentally change what strategic leadership looks like. So interesting. What you just did was predictive coding. You're predicting based on how you think other technologies have impacted strategic leadership. And what's so interesting is that in this study, they talk about feed forward learning. And the brain prioritizes new incoming data instead of clinging to old predictions. And so feed forward is the brain's wiring mode. It lets this new reality, okay, AI is here to stay, this is going to be a thing, but it lets it override old assumptions so you can adapt quickly. Now, at this point in time, people will say, well, this sounds like growth mindset. I'm a big fan of growth mindset, but I do want to share that growth mindset is not the same. They do work hand in hand, though. Growth mindset is the belief you can adapt. So, again, feed forward is the brain's update button. It's like bottom up learning. When you log on your computer and it says a software operating update is needed, that's your feed forward. Growth mindset is belief that if you click update, the button will work. If that helps make sense. Okay, so you just enjoyed working with me and predictive coding. Now we're going to do a little micro reset. Predictive coding is that forecasting engine. So you picked a 2 through 10. And what's interesting is AI is going to create surprises for us. And the brain's either going to update its model or it's going to protect the old one. Feed forward, remember, is the update mode. So in real time, we want to engage purposefully and feed forward. So you'll see that on the screen, it says one tiny way I could recraft my role with AI to feel even more valuable, in control, and excited about work. So if you could share and chat with me, I would love for you to just think about that. And I know you're all in different sectors and different things, but if you could recraft your role where AI is allowing you to feel more valued, more empowered, more in control, more excited about work, what would that look like? What's one tiny way you could do that? And now I'm realizing you need a little more time to think. So it's going to be interesting is that If we were in a room together, you would probably feel the threat level drop. Now people aren't worried about scanning for a threat. They're like, wait, I have a problem to solve. So that, if you felt that, if you even felt that shift, if you even were sitting back in your chair and you leaned forward to type or write on a piece of paper, that is predictive coding shifting from protection into learning. So do this exercise. If you are a part of an AI steering committee or you're watching, you want to see resistance turn into engagement in any sense of the word, the real win is not necessarily the answers themselves, although I really appreciate Jason, you saying create more time for strategic thinking, or Mark, you saying with new ideas, or Susanna about prioritizing your tasks. So, yes, and Christy and Cheryl, meeting notes and deliverables. Absolutely. The real power is not just even those answers. The real power is in that internal shift, what was happening in your brain to come up with the answer. Oh, I could use it to handle repetitive reports or spend more energy and time on strategy. It's the prefrontal activation that you're after. So, again, the key difference is that feed forward, shifting that in our brains, feed forward is the neural process of letting new information override an old prediction. It's the brain's mechanism to adapt in real time, to regenerate. Growth mindset is the conviction that doing that will lead to improvement. So, again, the difference. All right. So, we have covered two studies. Let me give you the third study. And I obviously have saved, in my opinion, the best for last. The last groundbreaking study, actually, there were two, but the biggest one was around neurogenesis. Now, I'm imagining you all cheering. Okay, there were two breakthrough studies last year that showed us about how rewards shape the brain and therefore the organization. So neurogenesis is the birth of new neurons, brand new brain cells that keep growing. And here's what's so exciting. Dimitri Friesen and team proved last year that adult humans continue to grow new neurons in the hippocampus. That is the memory and emotion center. Well into, drum roll, our 70s and 80s. Y'all, this means that everything we were told before, that the brain isn't fixed at adulthood around age 25 as previously thought. As previously thought, we thought then those neurons just created new synapses or rewired based on signals for the environment. But no, groundbreaking as of last year, adult humans can grow new neurons in the hippocampus. But wait, chronic stress and urgency kill those new neurons by up to 50 to 70%. So safety, novelty, and enriched environments keep those little new neurons alive. They help the brain stay flexible and adaptable. And I guess the point I want to make is just imagine if it was always winter and the ground was always cold and frozen and hard and that harsh pressure and structure. Imagine how few crops could break through that ground to get through, right? So it's that same idea is what they're saying. And here's why. Oh, and the second study by Muesli, it was Muesli, I'm sorry, was it mapped at the human brain. They did it in 3,800 people, and they found that the brain reorganizes, literally reorganizes at predictable turning points at age 9, 32, 66, and 83. And so that again speaks to environment and age and how our neurons are coming on. And why this matters to leaders is that chronic urgency and no recovery windows will kill up to 70%. So it's not that your team is tired, you are literally preventing the brain from generating fresh capacity for learning, for emotional steadiness, for innovation. My plea to those in organizations is protect neurogenesis. Create organizations, design organizations that have safety and recovery. You're giving your organization new cognitive talent that can adapt when everything else feels stuck. So, this is exciting because what we see is what you reward today becomes tomorrow's reflex. at literally a biological level. And so speaking about the rewards, there's more in the study. I don't have time to go deeply into the peer review journal article, but you're welcome to go do it. I have all the citations there. What the system rewards, the system becomes. And so you could probably see, Annie, if you don't mind, go ahead and launch our last poll, please. Um, what I want to know is what are you seeing in your organization? What are you seeing most reliably reinforced when the pressure is high? If you're thinking about the pressure feeling really high, you can select up to two. And yes, Eugene, there is hope for you. You are going to be able to create new neurons. That is fantastic. And while you're doing the poll, what we're seeing here on the screen is just a juxtaposition of what is rewarded under pressure and what signals grow at capacity. And if you map this over, you can obviously tell that the left would create toxic resilience, the right would create regeneration. And so repeated reward signals impact our decision quality under pressure. And I think that's what's so fascinating about all of this is that it really does come down to our decision quality, our ability to actually relate and innovate in organizations. So this is what's is really critical about what we reward and the behaviors we expect to see. So it looks like the poll is coming out now, and wow, okay, there is a lot of consensus on rewarding the speed of a response, and I'm assuming sometimes that means even after hours, because then the next one of the other highest is availability outside of hours, saying yes and being flexible all the time, and delivering at all costs. That's a really big one. We're also seeing a few people talking about boundary clarity as well. And so I want you to be able to see that. So one micro reset is if you thought about that, like especially the one that's the highest on here, delivering at all cost or speed of response. If this reward signal shifted even slightly in your organization, even slightly, like you weren't always expected to be on after hours or the speed of response or delivering at all costs, if even shifted slightly, the first thing that would improve would be what? Where would you see improvement? If this reward signal shifted even slightly, would be the first thing you think you would see? What would be the indicator that you would be seeing some improvement? Usually I'm hearing from people things like quality of life. I'm hearing things like enjoyment. I'm hearing things like coming up with new ideas. Seeing curiosity and things like that. Talent retention is another one from HR leaders. That's right. So we just looked at three groundbreaking neuroscience studies from last year. I want to just quickly share a few design principles with you. Most of you know this already, but the middle management is the pressure point. It is the biggest leverage point. We are seeing that they carry and absorb pressure from the top and resistance from the bottom. And so we know that middle management, manager of managers, is a really critical design element in place for us to do. It is the fastest place where we can create real change at scale. And so, what I want you to think about is there's two performance levers. We have to think about not only helping those people, but also everyone, meso, macro, and micro levels of the organization. How do we help with regulation and how do we help with capacity? How do we do both at the same time? Regulation stabilizes the system in the moment. So if your own nervous system is on fire, it's you going for a walk or breathing deep or petting an animal. It's stabilizing in the moment. It can bring decision quality back online when pressure is high in the moment. But capacity is something the organization needs to be working on at all times, and usually at the macro and meso level. Capacity determines whether the system can hold more change. It means that the alarms don't go off as often because we have more capacity. And so those three micro things that we did, I just want you to know they are very small things and none of them required a new strategy, more budget, or headcount. These are little things that you can do. And so these design principles are simple and easy. This is just a recap slide. We want to design for the neurological state, not just the structure. We want to build capacity before we ask people to do more transformation. And we want to reward the behavior that we want to see in the future. And this is the biggest, most important piece here is when I go into organizations, these are the four control points that determine if the change is going to hold. Decision architecture, speed doesn't come from pushing harder. This is speed and quality under pressure. The second is reward signaling. We just talked about this. What gets praised in hallway moments rewires people. Identity as threat is a design variable. AI doesn't just change workflow, it changes people's perceived value. It's an identity threat. And if leaders don't explicitly design for identity safety, then we're going to expect resistance. And the last is recovery as infrastructure. Systems that don't metabolize change become brittle. Recovery doesn't just always mean time off, but it does mean having mechanisms that allow adaptation. It means separating the push cycles from the integration cycles. So these are the control points. And here is where I'll invite you to start putting any questions in chat. I made this slide specifically for knowing we have a broad audience. So if you are an executive at an enterprise level, I have easy one high leverage move you could do starting this quarter on the far left. If you are in HR, you're a CHRO, you're an HR business partner, I have another one for you in the middle. And then if you were a director or a senior manager, I have one for you on the right. And if you want, you can screenshot this as a little takeaway. But cultural doesn't just change through values, it changes through visible reinforcement. People are not learning from PowerPoints, they're learning from experience and reinforcement. And so I'm happy to take any questions that you have. My final thought, my final thing that I want to say is to remind you about that little comment from my son that when the only way we know things are alive, they change. And that one senior leader at the tech company that I started out with, when he leaned back in his chair and he said, leadership isn't rocket science, they can get on board or get out of the way. I didn't go toe to toe with him and argue. We started small. We did co-regulation. We did have conversations. We shifted what got celebrated. And we allowed people to switch from fear into feed forward communication. And so months later, his exact quote back to me was, I thought the technology would be the hard part. Turns out people are the real asset and the real challenge. And it's true. So, my invitation is to see your organization as a living nervous system, to work with the biology, because if we can design and redesign our organizations and systems with people in mind, we're going to thrive, not just survive. So, thank you so much. All right, let's see. I am checking on the chat. When you work with organizations, which of these four control points tends to break first under real pressure and why? That is, so let me get back to that slide so everyone has a reference point. So the thing that is, I think that the decision architecture is one we can easily get in place once we understand and know the difference. I love the author of Atomic Habits talks about how we think so many decisions are permanent. So we need to be able to think about what's reversible versus irreversible. He talks about decisions as, is it a hat? Very easy to reversible. Is it a haircut? You gotta wait a few months, or is it a tattoo? So we can do that one. I think that where it becomes really tough is recovery as infrastructure because we're so bought into an American capitalistic society that only pays people for 2 weeks off. And I think there's a real fight against like this 40-hour work week. Now, I'm not advocating that we only work 10 hours a week, although that would be great. But I am advocating for having to build after action loops that are blame free. How do we understand integration windows after major pushes? And especially load management is a big thing. So I find that organizations struggle the most with that one. Let's see. What's one reward signal leaders commonly reinforce without realizing that it creates long-term? Oh, see, this is where I want to ask you your experience. But one that I see often, and it is so minor, is back to what y'all talked about is the speed. We are expected to always be on. And show me something that is alive that doesn't have a rest or recovery cycle. Even our cell phones perform better when paused and plugged in. So that's one that's really interesting. Let's see. Where do you see organizations confusing regulation with capacity, and what's the consequence of that? Great point. Where I see organizations confusing that is that they take May as a mental health month and they put a lot of eggs in that basket and they'll put even money into mental health yoga programs, or even they'll sponsor a free app for the organization, and they'll think that if people can regulate, then it will result in capacity changes, and it's not true. Remember, regulation is like changing the thermostat. It just helps in the moment. Capacity is the critical. How and capacity, the reason why that's so hard and why they want the yoga classes and the meditation apps to work is because the capacity is the harder thing to change. The capacity means we have to change policies. We have to rewire the system. We have to then retrain leaders. It is a more systematic approach for sure. If a leadership team could realistically focus on strengthening just one of these control points in the next 6 to 12 months, where do you see the highest return? One, if it's that you, since you said team, the highest return would be on the decision architecture, because so many managers, especially of managers, spend how much of their day where people are escalating. They're escalating decision points. And so autonomy and clarity is going to be critical. And if you can do a RACI, or I'm from a big fan of a Darcy chart, where you're doing decision quality and role clarity, that is a big leverage point if your team hasn't already done that. All right, what time are we at, Misty? I don't know. I want to be mindful of everyone's time. Okay, a few minutes. Um, Oh, hi, Mark. Fear is so pervasive in organizations. How do we work on helping our organizations go beyond fear? Well, fear is a natural feeling and emotion, but it is just data. And so when people are in fear, you know that their amygdala is responded. We know where the body's going. We know biologically what's happening. We cannot thrive in fear. And so what we have to do is we have to be able to parse out what is predictive and what is real. And so I do find that sometimes some very simple exercises of what's in my control, what's out of my control, what's real and what is perceived. I also like to ask organizations or leaders, they'll make some comment, AI is going to destroy us all. And I say, is that your opinion or is that your intention? Because I believe that as humans, we could have so much possessed energy to co-create our realities. And if it is our intention to destroy, then what do we do? Right. But I think it's people's opinion. I think they're trying to be in self-preservation mode. And so having conversations around those are really important. I remember when I started in the workplace, I had a boss who was like, there's no crying in business. Like there's no crying in baseball, there's no emotion in business. And the funny thing is, businesses are made up of humans, and humans have emotions. It's part of the limbic system. We're wired that way. If we can just acknowledge it, a lot of times there's a lot of great work, and Brene Brown has some great work around acknowledging the emotion and letting it, we're leaning into it and letting it fade so we can then bring the prefrontal cortex online. That's a lot of that feed forward. All right. And Christy brings up blame. Yeah. And blame is just passing the fear around. So, absolutely. Well, y'all have been such a great group. Thank you for all your participation in the polls and the conversation. If you're interested in learning more, I have an organizational nervous system website. You can email me or you can connect on LinkedIn. Those are two distinct QR codes. But thank you so much for your time. And thank you, Culturati, for having me on.